Welcome to another exciting episode of Book and Lounge, a podcast that takes the guesswork out of choosing your next read. I'm your host, Jacqueline. Today we're delving into the captivating world of Kehinde Andrews' groundbreaking book, The New Age of Empire. I'm thrilled to be joined by Taiwo, Katrina, Yvonne and David to unpack the thought-provoking themes that lie within this powerful work. In The New Age of Empire, Kehinde Andrews challenges the conventional narratives surrounding imperialism and explores how imperialism continues to shape the modern world. The book confronts readers with the uncomfortable truths about the legacy of colonialism, the persistence of racial injustice, and the ways in which global power structures are still at play. It's a profound and timely examination that pushes us to rethink our understanding of history and its impact on contemporary society. Throughout this episode, we'll be diving deep into the themes explored in the book, from systematic racism and white supremacy to the dynamics of power and the possibilities of collective resistance. So grab yourself a drink, sit back, and enjoy this lively discussion. New Age of Empire. What do you think of it?
I enjoyed it. Wasn't particularly hard to read as a non-fiction book. I did feel that there was something missing which I couldn't necessarily put my finger on. As I mentioned before, it just felt as if he was making various arguments which didn't always seem to be proven. He didn't always seem to have the evidence to back up what he was saying.
How about all the references that he I thought that he was actually quite meticulous because he had a lot of references at the back for all the points that he was trying to prove, the things he was trying to prove. I mean, I did look up some of the references.
I thought he referenced it. I thought what he said was supported, and I just felt like I was very glad I'd read the Black and British Forgotten History, because I just felt like he's got all the sweeping ideas, but the sort of how it unfolded in real time. Because it's one thing to look back and say, you know, he's got these sort of sweeping whiteness did this and that and the other, but that's kind of with hindsight, isn't it? I found it was nice in the other book we read to see how it unfolded to reach what he could now describe as whiteness at certain points. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was very well written and well argued, especially the earlier parts. I don't think I concentrated so much as I went on, so it's not his fault, it's probably mine.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I felt it was very logically written, and I felt it was all the arguments were quite well laid out. And it was in contrast to the Black and British or Forgotten History. I think it felt maybe a bit more scientific or a bit more analytical, that maybe there wasn't as much personal history in there. It didn't seem to be as much human element, but it was just more factual, kind of, and I liked that as well. I liked how it ended too. I kind of liked the way it was explaining everything and then coming up with some kinds of solutions as well, kind of towards the end. And and I liked the way he was talking around this notion of having upgrades. I thought it was quite significant. He talked about 2.0, you know, kind of colonialism 2.0, that kind of, this is the kind of systemic way of thinking we've got into now. So I thought that really underpinned the book. I really liked that aspect.
I would say, I would say, I don't know if the word is enjoyed it. I liked the fact that it was factual. I liked the fact that it sort of educated me, I hasten to say, because I always thought of colonialism and slavery as things of the past, the sins of the past, that we've sort of glazed over them, and I haven't had connected them to present day life in the way that this book has. I liked that history. I liked particularly the first 4 or 5 chapters. The last 2 or 3 chapters, I kind of sort of faded and I wanted the book to end. To be fair, I thought after I'd read the first 4 or 5 chapters, that's all I needed. The last 2 chapters were neither here nor there for me. I mean, I think throughout the book, he is obviously arguing a specific point of view, and he is finding evidence to support that particular view. And I think that sort of came through over, and I wondered if that was overemphasized. That was my only thing about the book that I'd probably criticize, because I think sometimes you are just holding at straws, grabbing everything to emphasize that particular point. But yeah, no, it was really informative. It was a study of history.
I think I agree with you. I'm not sure "enjoy" is the right word to use to describe it. I mean, I thought I knew quite a lot, having studied history and also done the Black and Asian presence in Britain. So I thought I knew quite a lot, but actually I found that I was learning a whole load of things that I was not aware of. So I like that element of it. And like you, I like the fact that it ties all of that history with what's happening now. Because most of the time you see things that are happening and then you don't really think back to history and say, actually, this is the reason as to where we are today. We just sort of take for granted what's happening now. Because you just, it's our government, is that, but you don't tie it back. And I like how he points out, actually, this is because this and that have happened in the past. The only thing I guess I would have liked to see is he raises a lot of issues and why they're happening, but gives no solutions. I would have liked to see a bit more, solutions as, okay, this is where we are. What can we do to get out of where we are and make a better world? That's possibly the only criticism that I have of it.
I think he says that the solutions were given in the book that came before this, in the Back to Black book, and that he wrote this as a result of things that were raised by readers in Back to Black. So maybe in some ways it would help me to understand this book better, or maybe look at it from a different perspective if I actually read Back to Black.
Yeah. So are you going to read Back to Black then? Or should I be adding Back to Black on the reading list?
I have to find the time. I've got so many other things to read. And then at the same time, I'm reading Caste at the moment, but it's quite big. So I'm trying to break it down into chunks. But yeah, I'm going to read it. When? That's the question. When?
Yeah, I feel I need to read it. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to read Back to Black, hoping it'll help me understand the end of New Age of Empire, because I found it a bit unsatisfactory. I mean, it's so much doom and gloom. And then he does talk about global warming, climate change things, which I wonder if they come into Back to Black, because I feel like that's an important part of our future. I learned a lot more about, for example, Christopher Columbus and all that side of colonialism. But sometimes the way he worded things, I felt as if he was suggesting almost a sort of conspiracy theory. And, it's like now you can say white people, elites might get together and plan on being a white elite. I've never sort of felt, or they are one, plan on maintaining being one. I never sort of felt like in the early modern era when all that sort of, people from Europe were first starting to come out to Africa and America and everything, that they were sitting down in a sort of we're going to be elites mode. They were just adventurers and entrepreneurs and people who were willing to exploit somebody else.
Where were they though? Because if you think about it, this class, so all these people were of a certain class, right? So they probably hung out and they were men. So they all probably hung out in the same private members' men's club and shared ideas.
In the 1560s, but did they? I mean, okay, maybe they sat in coffee shops a little bit later than that, I don't know.
I think that is a class thing. Number one is a class thing, and number two, all these people were from the same class, the aristocracy. They had the same ideas. They went to the same schools or universities, and then they supported each other. So someone would come up with this theory, and then the other person would either come and support it or try and challenge it in some way. But I think that that's how all of this developed. I don't think that they necessarily sat down and said, okay, let's consider ourselves the elite. And then it happened. But I think it's a process, because they were all in the same class, hang out in the same places, probably the same social circles.
I agree with you. And I think in Black and British, that process unfolds. Whereas I found in Kehinde Andrews, it's kind of, I don't know, like it's sprung out of nowhere that people are these white elites that are God-given white elites, that the underpinning wasn't there for me to explain how that came about. But that's just one aspect. I learned a lot, and I really appreciated the book. I think it should be widely read.
So that kind of brings me to a question I had. So he's basically divided the book into 8 different sections. And the first one is, I am white, therefore I am. So basically what he's arguing is that most of the world is underpinned by Western philosophy. And he describes in that section how that came about. His conclusion is that how the world is today is based on all these Enlightenment ideas by people like Immanuel Kant and so on, about the superiority of certain racial groups and the inferiority of others, and why the world is unbalanced is because all the things that developed through those Western views and thinking. Did you agree with that summary? Is the world the way it is because of that? And then what can we do? Because he doesn't offer any solution. So what can we do to actually challenge some of those ideas?
To be honest, the whole notion of the Enlightenment and the fact that, his assertion that knowledge and reason did not spread out from Europe, that, is he saying, science, maths, medicine, reason, and even political organizations all have their roots in the world outside of the West?
Yeah, so basically Persia and Asia, some of those ideas were stolen from the Muslim.
And then how they were whitewashed.
And then were whitewashed, yes.
I found that, for me, probably the most fascinating part of the book, and how he links that to the issue of capitalism, the need to gather capital in order to create wealth in the capitalist model, and how it's necessary to go out and other parts of the world, basically rip up or rip off other parts of the world if you're going to accumulate capital in order to develop yourself. But I thought the idea of developing yourself to the detriment of the place that you're ripping off, I felt that he made a very strong argument, because most of the time you see it from one side rather than the other side. You see it from the side of the economies that have become developed rather than the economies that have become underdeveloped, and why they become underdeveloped. Bearing in mind that those economies that are underdeveloped are then playing this game that is skewed towards those that are already developed. That was, for me, the most insightful part of the book.
2 things from that. So the first one is that this notion that all these Western countries were ripping off other countries and taking that and then using it to develop their own countries. It kind of makes me think back to what Katrina just said about, there was no concerted effort where people sat down together and said, this is what we're going to do, let's do it, and then become...
I think there may well be a concerted effort that there's wealth in these other places and they need to get hold of it. Taiwo, I like that bit, particularly that you were saying, where he explains how all the things that the West has sort of makes it sound as if they've emerged from the West, have all been taken from somewhere else, the ideas and the science and that, and then developed. However, The West has done that extremely efficiently. And one of the areas I know a little bit about is the Portuguese getting round to East Africa, which they wanted to do because they thought they were riches they could trade. But when they got there, they discovered that when they first arrived, the Swahili states were very disappointed with what they had to offer. That they couldn't trade on an equal basis with them because the Swahili states were used to trading with India, who had stuff they wanted. And there was nothing really coming from Europe that people wanted. So I suppose to be successful, they just had to be ruthless because they had nothing to really exchange. I don't know. I just find the whole ideas of how it unfolded interesting.
I guess also that issue of, exchanging and how you want to exchange, what model you want to employ when you meet, you as a group of people meet some other group of people and you want to engage in trade and commerce, how do you approach it? If you're not approaching it as equals, if you're not approaching it on the basis of we can learn from each other, if you're using that capitalist model where I have to accumulate as much as possible to your detriment, then there's always going to be winners and losers, aren't there?
Jackie, I do, just to take you back to your question around white supremacy, I think there are theories like, Darwin's theory that, man started as ape and then they were Africans and then they became more developed and became Europeans. So there has been these theories, whether they've been then studied by people and people have made them become real, I don't know. But there has been theories that, there is that centers around white supremacy and that there is a hierarchy of who is fully human and who is not. And you can easily see how that can tie in with Black lives or brown lives being disposable because they are lesser. If we are likened closer to monkeys and apes, and we are part of this evolution, and obviously the white man being completely, fully developed, this could be where it stems from, surely. And that's the premise of the book.
And I absolutely agree with you. I agree that most of how we view the world today is still based on that hierarchy that was started. Those ideas are being challenged, but why do many people still believe those ideas? I don't know if you've seen the videos in doing the rounds on social media where Chinese people are coming to African countries and, they're giving them all these placards to hold.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Or the ones where, the Chinese had an exhibition in a museum comparing Black people to monkeys. What can we do to challenge those stereotypes? Because we do know that that's not who we are, what Black people are. That's not what Asian people are. And white people are not as great as all these philosophers held them out to be. So what is it that we need to do to challenge those narratives?
So you're talking about racist stereotyping?
Yeah.
But I think that that sort of book, the New Age of Empire, it's not understood by other people. When I say other people in the elites, the people. The government control what's taught in history in schools, and they control what's taught about empire. And even when they say that the curriculum allows teachers to teach it, that's probably true. I don't know, I haven't researched, but I expect that's true. But no teacher is going to make an effort to teach that, I've started thinking, until there's exam questions on the paper about it. Because they teach according to their students' passing exam, don't they? So until those things are changed, nobody's interested. And that first chapter, I'm white, therefore I am, I think it's very important because especially when you live in Europe, and I suppose maybe in America as well, there's always this sort of white being the standard, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else, then you have to explain, it's a man, it's a woman, it's a white, black, it's something extra to that. If you just leave it, it's a white man, isn't it? So, and that hasn't changed.
So isn't it even more deeply ingrained than that, in that it's a system, it's systematic? So all the structures that are in place, the UN, World Bank, which he does talk about, all the structures that govern how the world is run, they're all centered towards whiteness. So yes. It's more than just a curriculum. Anyway, what did you find the most shocking or most surprising from what you read?
For me, it was the chapter on genocide. I found that quite difficult to read because I didn't know the extent in terms of the quantity, the number of people, and then the duration of the genocides and how.
Sorry, I can just clarify. When you say the numbers, I mean, which people are you talking about here? Because I think he described quite a few places where genocide happened.
Yes. So I knew about the Native Americans and how they had been, to a large extent wiped out. But I didn't know about other places where he talked about the Aboriginals in Australia. And I think he also spoke about some parts of Africa.
Yeah, Namibia. Where the Germans
yes,
wiped out one of the tribes.
So it's that whole justification, isn't it, where once you're able to consider these people as less than human, they're not like you, then you can justify the extermination or the eradication of a whole race or group of people.
The other thing that I found quite interesting was how some things are considered genocide and others are not.
I mean, the definition when you're looking at that kind of the legal terminology and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So politics is going, kind of coming into it, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about the Uyghurs, the Chinese Muslim Uyghurs, and then the Chinese state, and whether it's a genocide or whether it's not a genocide, or you're looking at maybe Rwanda, or you're looking at Kosovo.
Yeah.
Because there are ramifications, aren't there? If you say it's a genocide, or if it's widely accepted to be a genocide, then there are consequences. Whereas when it's not defined as a genocide, there are also consequences.
Yeah, for example, like what's happened in Palestine. I mean, I think that's tantamount to genocide, but nobody cares about. I mean, if you look at the things that are happening in Syria, things that are happening in the Yemen.
Yemen especially.
Yeah.
Well, not especially, but it's so ignored, isn't it? It's so ignored, and we're so happy to sell arms to Saudi Arabia.
It's very much overshadowed, isn't it? Like a forgotten war, overshadowed by what's going on in Europe and Ukraine.
And Ukraine, exactly. Actually, there are two things that surprised me. The treatment of the Aborigines, how Australia tried to control their numbers and also just tried to wipe them out. The fact that if they were mixed, they tried to get them to marry white people so that they died out.
I thought that was quite ironic, though, when we hear so much, because I didn't know about that policy. I knew certain things that he said about Australia, but I didn't know about that policy. And I thought that was very ironic when we hear all about these sort of one-drop theories.
Yeah.
But that makes me think that the elites will turn every argument on its head to suit them. And so when we say we define a group of people as not human enough that we need to accord them proper rights, next week, if for some reason it suits us a different way round, that argument will be spun round in some other way.
Yes.
I mean, you watch what's going on with Ukraine now. If Europe is affected badly by shortages of wheat and fresh veg and all the rest of it, which it's very likely by the look of things with the drought, well, Europe's not the place that's going to go hungry.
No.
Wherever there is food, it will be bought and brought to Europe. It's other countries that will go hungry as a result of that. Which is where I think the book is right. There's no change.
So nations basically look after their own interests.
Rich, powerful ones will get away with it.
And now they'll continue to exploit weaker nations and allow the rest of the world to continue to starve as long as their people and their nations are fine. And the other thing that surprised me was the famine in India and Churchill. Was it Churchill? Well,
Yeah.
yes, that I found really shocking. The fact that he'd stopped the ships and the grain, and he intentionally did that. He didn't really care whether or not they died.
But not surprising, because when you listen to politicians now, we listen to Truss and Sunak telling us about themselves. They talk all the time about how they're going to preserve lifestyles and so on for the people in this country. And they do that because of democracy. But they can only achieve that at the expense of other countries in the world.
I find that whole idea, the Truss and Sunak and the kind of things that they're coming out with, I find it so troubling that they feel confident enough to come out and say that they'll do these things, knowing that the general public just don't care. I find it troubling that the general public do not care.
Well, the general public feel helpless, don't they? I don't think they don't care, but they don't know what to do.
But why do you think the general public needs to care unless the general public is directly affected? The whole kind of, the idea of outsourcing the UK immigration to Rwanda, I just thought at the time that this was like, it's a bit like when Trump was on the rise. I thought at the time that this can never happen. This must be some kind of a joke. And people are going to wake up and there'll be this strong pushback. And although they're testing the waters, they will never succeed. But then, then you see that the policy is then brought in the same way that you see that Trump rose, despite everything. So despite the common man, Joe Public's best interest, still, the majority of people seem to be politically apathetic, which is why such things happen.
Yeah, and I think as in the book, it touches upon the amount of wealth, the way the wealth's distributed, that 62 people own a third of the world's wealth. And I think a lot of the policies it's like a neo-capitalism. A lot of the policies are now just designed to protect the super rich and corporations. So corporations are taking over lots of properties. And I think that he is suggesting towards the end of the book that there needs to be a revolution because things have just gone so far. There is so much poverty in the world. And I think it's just, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is just more and more extreme. And I wonder if, I think there is a kind of always seeing it as othering, poverty. People seeing themselves as not necessarily being affected, but more and more people are affected. And I wonder if that will contribute to more fight for equality. I think that's what we're hopeful that would happen. There'd be more kind of push for wider equality of the human race. That would seem to be what we need, a radical rethink. And I know that's idealistic, but I think more and more, as things are becoming more and more ridiculous, then it may not be that ridiculous to have something radical in place, something to change, if there's more and more civil unrest.
You think also with the number of strikes that are kind of ongoing at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. But the common man doesn't really have much. The common person doesn't really have much power. We seem to be quite powerless against these corporations and against governments. And I'm not sure we have actually elected this government. They haven't even had a majority. I think there's no proportional representation. So it's just very odd systems, and it just is, as you said, it's just echoing back all the kind of the history. When you see it, it really helps to kind of put it in that context. But it's becoming more and more outrageous what's happening.
It's always been outrageous because I think the world is full of haves and have-nots. And unfortunately, we here, the five of us, are part of the haves because we are part of the West. We are beneficiaries of all that's happened in the past. The real have-nots are people that are in places like sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason I say this is because, and what frustrates me with places like the UN is that they talk about, health for all. But when they say health for all, even that you have to define what does health mean for an African child compared to health for a European child. It's completely completely different definitions. I think for the African child is, let's make sure they don't die, and that's definition. Whereas obviously for a European child, it's the rest. So, and I feel like as long as you have the haves and have-nots, and then the haves obviously have the resources, those that have resources are not going to be giving up the resources easily. And history tells us this. If you look at, we talked about this genocide where basically they forcibly took everything away from the Indians in America, the Aborigines in Australia, and then you come to slavery where they needed the labor. Then once they were done with labor, they needed resources. So this is why the colonization. And I'm not sure if it was all that logically well planned as Katrina says, but that's what happened, But it's all about the haves and have-nots, and the ones that have, I'm afraid, will never just give it up. Even today, we have IMF, the UN, etc. They are largely run by the US.
Just coming back to the issue of resources and the haves, what I find frustrating is Africa has all the resources. Africa has everything that it needs to sustain itself without relying on any other continent. And so when you come to the definition of the haves, for me, Africa has. And yet we are not able to exploit and make the most of what we have because bad governments, but also more than bad governments, is interference from all these other Western powers. Africa is not where it is just because of our leaders. I think even with our leaders, we still would have been able to bumble through and make it somehow. It's the fact that
you wouldn't have been allowed different leaders.
Exactly. So where you have a leader who, actually wants to do something, they're taken out. I mean, look at Gaddafi. Gaddafi wanted a United States of Africa. He wanted a single currency. He was doing a lot for different African nations. What did they do? They took him out.
This is why Africa is quite complex, because people sort of say, some are quite harsh with Africans, particularly African leaders, because of the quality of governance and their capabilities. But if we look at Africa and we liken it to a tree, what we see, the branches, the leaves, that's the leaders, that's the, all the stuff that's going on the surface. Underneath, the roots are the IMF, people like the UN. I mean, the other thing that you should know, what's not in this book, is that, African countries are loaned money at, say, 10%, and they need the money the most, but you get, say, European countries that are getting loans at 1%.
Yeah.
Those that already have are helped to have more. Mm-hmm. Those that have nothing are the ones that are punished even more. And of course, what happens is that you end up getting more and more into debt. And then you find that whatever they're earning, 30-40% is going to repaying the debt. You're left with 60%. And even that 60%, the IMF, the UN is telling you how to manage that money, chastising you for how to manage that 60%. But we're not discussing the 40% that you're taking away from me. I don't have the whole pie. Mm-hmm. I don't have 100. So, when we talk about Africa, I feel like we're always talking about the symptoms, as in, because these leaders come and go. And this is why the problem perpetuates itself. Of course, there's bad governments that we know, but there are underlying root problems that need to be addressed. But these will not be addressed because obviously as I keep saying, they have and have nots, and we the five of us sitting here are part of the haves because we are in the right continent. We're not starving.
I do agree with you. We are part of the haves, but not necessarily at the same level. I mean, we have our own issues to contend with just being here, but that's not a conversation for today. I wanted to come back to Africa and specifically the non-white West, as he describes them in the book, and specifically he's talking about China,
and I think
India. So India and China are
marching ahead. And at some point, I mean, what he's saying is that actually China is going to overtake most Western countries. I mean, it's almost overtaken. It's overtaken most, and then soon it's going to overtake the US in terms of development. But his argument is China has had to adopt the same capitalist way of thinking, and also this elitist way of looking at people, putting people in hierarchies for it to get to where it's got to. So then does that mean then that there's absolutely no way to defeat the system? Because if China's had to adapt.
China is producing products for the world, as we know. Everything is made in China. China needs raw materials. They need resources in order to make the products to sell to the world. Africa has those resources. So, they're using their means and ways to get those resources. And if African leaders are going to be selling raw materials for a song.
And that's why China is in Africa, isn't it? And that's why China is doing what it's doing in Africa.
What is China doing in Africa?
China is there. On the surface, it's building roads, it's developing the continent, it's providing the much needed infrastructure that is supposedly missing. That's one way. That's one reason why China's there. Number two, China is there for minerals. That's the main reason why China is in Africa.
China there is not there for the interest of any African state or any African country. China comes in. China brings its own workforce. China will bring their own equipment. All these roads that they're supposedly building. After 2-3 years, what happens to these roads? You can't drive on them.
Is that because they're not well maintained, or is that because they're not constructed properly?
I think it's simply they're not necessarily constructed properly.
It's building a lot of national stadiums, but it also brings its own people to build.
But they're building what the African elite want them to build, aren't they?
Yes, but surely this might take us back to what Katrina was saying right at the start when we're talking about white supremacy. The question was, when they were going with genocide, when they were going to America or to Australia or to New Zealand or Tasmania, I mean, you were saying, were they going just as people that wanted land and they couldn't care whether they encountered white people, green people, yellow people? They were just grabbing land. Is that what you're saying? What you were suggesting, Katrina? Like, it wasn't a well thought out that we are racist and we are going to be taking away land from brown people.
But in the beginning, they weren't going for land. They were going for trade.
Yes.
The land issues come up afterwards because that's my...
As it depends who, because obviously you had someone who was going to India but stumbled upon America, Columbus.
And killed all those people. But initially, what he was looking, what was Columbus's mission at the beginning? Wasn't it to find new land?
They're trying to make a new route to India because India was blocked from Europe by the Muslim traders, and things had to go via those traders. And because of the conflicts between Christianity and Islam, there was only there were people who travelled across all of it, but they were few and it wasn't easy. So they were looking for a different way to get there. So Columbus was going and he reached America.
The Caribbean.
And then Vasco da Gama managed to get round the Horn of Africa and therefore into the Indian Ocean. But when he got to the Indian Ocean, the trade didn't pan out how they wanted it to be because they didn't have anything really that people there wanted to trade with. So then they started trying to control the shipping. They were making people pay tolls. I don't know what they called it, but, to travel from one city to another because there's a very ancient trading routes in the Indian Ocean that have gone on as far back as we know of. They were reasonably peaceful. People were exchanging and they broke into that, but they couldn't trade in it. But the land thing develops over time. But that's what I'm saying with Kehinde Andrews. I felt like he skipped explaining the development of some of these things. But going back to the Chinese, and you're saying about why they're in Africa, I mean, in all honesty, is any country, maybe only people from Cuba, ever going to another country just altruistically? I mean, the missionaries go, but personally, I think they have their own agendas anyway. But the Cubans, I don't know enough about it, but I believe they sent lots of doctors and things.
And teachers.
And maybe in the early days of the Soviet Union, some of the exchanges with Africa then were reasonably altruistic. But
they were not. They were trying to convert the countries into communist countries.
Well, exactly. So you can say that about the Chinese.
They're doing what any other Western country has done, or what any country that wants to become wealthy would do. And I'm pretty sure, given the same circumstances, that if there was an African country that had the opportunity to do what China's doing, they'll probably do it too, because they want the wealth for their countries. So I think I do agree with you, Katrina. It's inherently inherent for many nations to want to.
But once a group, as in this case, it's the white elite Western countries have got that grip. I mean, maybe China can prize it out of them, but it's very hard, isn't it? Because people never, like Yvonne is saying, who gives up? I mean, we might not be the most wealthy here, sitting here, but we're certainly very wealthy people in world terms. What are we going to give up? You know, we might give up a little bit of our lifestyle, but, you know, people don't. They say, well, I'm not going to, because unless everybody does it, it's not worthwhile. So none of us do it, really. It's just how humans are, isn't it?
Maybe that's why Donald Trump was getting very agitated with China, you know, during his many, many, many rants on Twitter, because I think he obviously realizes the power of, well, not that everybody realizes the power of China in terms of Americans out of employment, because, you know, the manufacturing base has dwindled. It's all in China. You can't compete with China because their wages are next to slavery in terms of how much they pay their millions of people.
Isn't that the issue, though? Sorry to butt in. Isn't that the issue with the whole idea of adopting this capitalist model, that there has to be this unlimited growth? You know, the whole gross domestic product is the measure that you always seem to use. Whereas I think he gave the example of, I think it was Bhutan, where you're talking about gross domestic happiness rather than gross domestic product. So he's saying that the capitalist model, which talks about unlimited growth and always, you know, striving to consume to keep this model going, is not the only way of doing things.
Sorry, I was just going to come back to, I guess, some of what Yvonne was saying and bring it back to the non-West world. We're unwilling to give up the wealth that we already have, but also how we continue to exploit the developing nations. For example, we were talking about there not being any jobs in America. And why are there no jobs in America? Because they've been outsourced to all these big corporations because they want to make as much money as they can. They want to make as much profit. They've outsourced their call centers to where? Places like India. And how much are they paying people in India? Absolutely crap. And then how much are they paying for people, for the factory workers in China? Absolutely next to nothing. Right? So the exploitation, he explains, the exploitation just continues. And then he was also talking about the universal basic income. I actually did really find interesting the explanation that he used, and I never really thought about this. You know, normally when you're thinking about minimum wage and so on, you think minimum wage in terms of where you are, right? And universal basic income in terms of where you are. You don't really think about the same for other countries. For example, I don't think that I never really thought, why should I earn a minimum of £10 an hour and not expect someone in Kenya, for example, to earn £10 an hour because their cost of living is lower. But why is their cost of living lower? Because their standard of life is less than mine.
I mean, to take it further, he talks in the book about, I think it was Sweden that were doing a case study where they were giving $590 per person. But at the same time, they were talking about the Kenya, I can't remember which country, where it was villagers getting $23.
Yeah.
And this is what I say about the IMF and the UN, that, they talk about equality, but there are different definitions for an African as it is for a European.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure it's just for African. I think it's for the global north and the global south, because I'm pretty sure they'll use exactly the same small amounts for someone in Bangladesh, for example.
But then again, it goes back to the whole premise of the book, that we are not surprised, because who's in charge, who's actually contributing the most money to the IMF, the World Bank? It's the US. So the US is obviously going to dictate the agenda.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really that's what surprised me. You talked about what surprised you the most was just how endemic, how huge this problem is. And also the fact that they were talking about reparations and that it's taken up to 2015 to compensate those that obviously were affected when slavery was abolished, yes. But for me, I keep thinking about, what about the enslaved? It's okay to talk about the Holocaust and to give £90 billion, and I guess it goes back to the same thing I come back to. If they tried to compensate, it is trillions of dollars. Who's going to want to give up? Who's going to want to give up any of their wealth? No one.
But coming back on that reparations thing, though, if you were, let's say, you wanted to compensate the children of ex-slaves and so on, and also people whose people were taken from African countries, in what form would that take? Who would you pay, and in what form would you pay?
And also, would you pay the whole African continent? Because they're saying 12 million, maybe 30 million slaves were taken to America, but what about the mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters that were left behind? They lost their sons, their daughters. The whole continent became underdeveloped because
exactly, yeah.
So it's as you say, it's huge. It's huge.
And I don't know if I necessarily think that it's possible to even pay any reparations, because there's just so much to consider. And as you say, Yvonne, nobody's going to give up or even give any of that money. Because I think I heard Kenya that's suing the British for reparations, I think for some of the tea planters that were evicted off their land. And I'm just thinking, there's no way the British are going to pay. No way. They can try. If it's only now that the Germans have decided to give back some of the treasures and artifacts that they looted from various West African countries. And this is just the stuff that they've looted. Imagine if it was money that they had to pay back. They're never going to do it. Just look at the case of Nazanin Zaghari. The only reason why she was in prison in Iran is because the British refused to pay what they owed the Iranians. Mm-hmm. So if they can do that to her...
And the Iranians also conflated the issues.
Sorry?
And the Iranians conflated the issue.
Exactly. Do you blame them?
Yes, it's debatable. It's debatable.
You can't. They are two separate issues.
They're separate issues. But the thing is that at the same time, I understand what you're saying, because, as he said, if you calculate a real figure for reparations, it will be in the multi-trillions, and it will bring down the whole capitalist model. So therefore, it's very unlikely for it to happen. But that in itself is not a reason for the push for reparations not to continue, for the calculation not to continue, so that, there is that framework in place. There would have been a time during the days when slavery was legal that they would have said, Wilberforce, St. Wilberforce and all the rest of them would have said, this can never happen. And yet it did, even though there was a price to pay, which, as Yvonne was saying, the price wasn't paid off until 2015, almost, I think, did he say almost 100 years?
Yeah, I felt really offended by that my tax money... Seriously.
If that was the only way to legally in quote, bring about the legal end of
But
one
it
person
wasn't the
enslaving
only
another.
way. They could have turned around and said to all these slave masters, no, at a certain point, the government could have passed a law to say, actually, no, we're not going to pay anymore.
They couldn't, Jackie, they couldn't, because
happened.
many of those people were in government. And that's the point.
That's a fair point.
It's the only way they could actually do it at the time. And I'm sure there were people who thought it was unfair then, but not many, obviously, not very many. One of the things, I just want to bring in, because I've found it interesting in the book, because I much as I worry about Black Lives Matter, I worry about climate change as well. And I think it's going to cut in. Now, I don't know. Perhaps we've just had a particularly bad summer and it's...
Good summer. It's been hot.
Well, no, I mean in terms of drought and that. I mean, it's wrong, isn't it? It's been lovely, but it's wrong. And it's affecting crops and everything. And then you've got Ukraine as well on top of that. Because he did mention climate change several times towards the end. But I feel like it might actually throw a new dynamic into a lot of things that are going on in the world.
I think things are just going to continue the way they are. And you know why? Because all these multinational corporations are just going to go and buy masses and masses of land in Africa and use it to grow food and whatever, and then sell it to Western countries. I don't see it changing. At all. I don't see the effect of climate change would have or would make any change in the balance of power. Even you see it now. I mean, I see it now in Uganda. You have a lot of organizations coming and buying masses and masses of land and kicking, small farmers off their land. Mm-hmm. And all these farmers, because I guess they don't know their rights and they're not necessarily concerned about things like climate change, they don't see into the future. And realize that actually this is something that's going to affect their children's children.
You don't think that the pressures of migration and so on will become even stronger on Europe as climate change, if climate change affects even more, everybody's ability to live and to feed themselves?
I don't know. I don't know. If anything, I see climate change affecting the globe everywhere in pretty much the same way. And if anything, I see more of Europe migrating out of Europe to try and find places that they can exploit. Depressing as it is, I think that's what's really going to happen.
Actually, talking about climate change and going back to the book, particularly the title, The New Age of Empire, because I was trying to understand why that title, because obviously, I'm assuming he's thinking that slavery and that's the old age, is it? And therefore, all this stuff that's coming up now, I mean, why the title?
The way I read it and the way I read it is that previously it was in your face. The countries owned up to being empires, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's more subtle, it's more underground. In fact, if you ask the average man on the street, they'll say empire doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. There are no countries out there with empires. But actually, empire is still continuous and is still ongoing. It's just a new form. And the new form is neocolonialism. That's how I read the title and I read the themes in the book.
Okay.
Empire 3. Is it 3.0?
Is it 2.0 or 3.0?
2.0.
2.0. And then we're going into 3.0.
I agree with you, Jackie. I think that's what it is. It's transmuted or transformed itself into something new, but it's still the same thing, because when he talked about the UN and the IMF and those other international bodies, they're there to prop up a system that already exists. And the system exists to maintain the status quo, to further the interests of the global north.
How did you feel about reading the book? What kind of emotions did it evoke? And what kind of thoughts were going through your head as you were reading it? I asked this because when I first started reading it, in fact, just the introduction, I was already triggered.
Just the introduction, not even from the forward.
It was introduction. The forward, maybe not, but the introduction, yeah.
Sorry,
I
Bon,
was
you were saying something. Go on.
going to say I found the content quite difficult to get through because there's some painful bits. And so in some ways, I was glad when it was over. I was like, what more can this man tell me about the wrongs of this world? But I found it to be very powerful and actually empowering because it's good to have that knowledge. I also found it to be very disturbing. Yeah.
I spent some time trying to decide whether there's some sort of genetic aspect to white people that has created this world the way it is. I'm sort of against that theory because it's a bit like the reverse of the theory that black people were, needed to be controlled or all these things. But it is disturbing. And this is why I ask myself about how did the history unfold to create this situation? Because it's so wrong, so saddening. It just makes me feel very sad because I don't see a solution. I don't see a way forward. I can see, individuals try their bit, but the framework seems locked, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And because capitalism, with all the faults of capitalism, people, I don't mean like mega capitalism, but just normal everyday shopkeeper type capitalism, people naturally seem to fall into that, don't they? It's a very natural way of, people to try and just better themselves in their surroundings and so on. And if you take away incentives for that, it doesn't, people do seem to need some sort of incentives, I think.
But are we not just using the wrong things to incentivize
very probably, very probably. But I saw a program once about young girls in Siberia, attractive apparently, 14, 15-year-olds who were being recruited for modelling. Very dodgy sounding. But one of the little girls, their interest in it was because they could see their parents had like Soviet style. They got their flat, they got their job, they got everything they needed, but it wasn't glamorous enough. It was too normal and boring. And I thought that sort of tells you about how people are, isn't it? That we do like to look for difference and look to improve ourselves as we see it at the time, whether it's improvement or not.
But isn't that because, and this is just a rhetorical question, you don't need to answer, isn't that because they've watched TV, they've seen America and how people live in the US or in the West, and they've actually said, oh, that's a better way, and America's therefore done a very good job of selling capitalism?
That's true. I agree with you on that, but I think even if you take all that out, perhaps people wouldn't be looking for those things, but people, look to make their life more luxurious than it is. Now, I would say the same in Africa, because there's many places in Africa, I think, where people can live really quite fulfilled lives in the old way, feeding themselves satisfactorily, improving their children growing up. But because now everybody's got to have Western education and the opportunity to get to different parts of the world and emulate all the things you see on TV, it's too difficult, isn't it? Because the West has damaged itself, really, but it still looks glamorous.
I think it's interesting, Katrina, you mentioned glamorousness because it's just so empty, isn't it? Glamour. It's a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. The things we see as glamorous, usually people hear glamorous on the inside. It's not necessarily beauty there. It's something different. So I think we've shifted away from what beauty is, and I think we might need to reimagine what kind of society needs to look like and think a bit about inner beauty and think about nurturing communities rather than think about just this kind of capitalist society. And I'm not sure it serves the rich, but I'm not sure it serves everyone. So I think glamorousness, maybe you're right, it's kind of become the thing, and with social media and this kind of, it just seems to be fakery. And what's the reality of it? People living in really high-end designer flats, but then what's their lifestyle like in reality? They're still seeking something, and I think this kind of beauty is missing. We're kind of missing something that's not there anymore. So I think, from my perspective, I think there will be a kind of an appetite to have something different. And that's where imagination might need to kick in, this notion of radical imagination, to look for other systems that will work and that aren't structurally racist.
Because if you think of, well, I know small town more than I know village in Africa, but, people can sit out and talk to each other and help each other in a way that you don't see in our roads over here anymore. Maybe years ago, but not anymore. So there's a lot of things we've lost that you might see. All the television looks nice, but...
Chickens Coming Home to Roost is the final section in the book. And I guess here he's talking about migrants and immigrants coming to US and to Europe to seek a better life because of what's happened in their nations. I guess we shouldn't really be surprised that all these young people are trying to leave their nations to come and look for a better way of life. Well, I guess, again, we shouldn't be surprised that there's a whole lot of resistance from citizens of Western countries to people coming from these countries. They do the jobs that they don't want to do anyway, but, take their jobs. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is the brain drain that's happening in the countries that they're leaving behind. Because if you think about it, Nigeria trains its doctors only for its doctors to migrate and then go and work in Canada. In places like Kenya and Uganda now, you have young people who should be there supporting the development of their economies, going to be maids in places like Saudi Arabia, only for them to be mistreated and sometimes killed. So it's all really, really gloomy, isn't it?
Of course, not everybody does get mistreated when they go to, for example, Saudi Arabia. Some people do save up their money, go home and build their house. And actually a lot of people do that.
The fact that they feel the need to do that is the issue, isn't it? The fact that the structures are so skewed that people feel the need to leave their home country and go to this other country in order to accumulate wealth. That is the problem.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming to. The fact that there's so many intelligent, young, able people who should be developing their nations who are forced to leave, right? And so those nations never really develop. I'm quite optimistic because I also know now a lot of people in the diaspora who are going back and trying to make things happen in their own countries. So I guess the question I wanted to ask is, perhaps not for you, David and Katrina, but more to Taiwo and Yvonne. Would you consider just upping and leaving and then going back?
Well, there's the issue that I just got married.
Congratulations. You can take it with you.
Yeah, I was about to say, go with your husband.
Would I go back? The thing is, I'll tell you one thing about Africa, because obviously I came to the UK not as a child, but as an adult. So I'm an economic migrant. And having worked in Africa for many years, Africa, there's two things. You have to decide your sanity or your soul. My soul is in Africa because I think that's where I feel most content, Katrina talked about how you can just completely be yourself and relax and there's no pressures, and some of them are actually on things that are actually quite fake and not that important. So that's where my soul is. But my sanity, Africa plays on my sanity, because when you have the issue of electricity, just the basic needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when your basic needs are not met, that's when you take flight. So the question is my soul or my sanity. At the moment, I choose my sanity. But as I get older, who knows? It'll be my soul that I choose.
Coming back onto the basic needs, do you not think that there's been enough changes and development to allow you to live? So, for example, not necessarily having to rely on the grid for your electricity or even the meter for your water, because you can now get solar power. You can dig your...
Yes, to be fair, I suppose it depends. When we say Africa, we're talking about a very broad, it's a continent, If you're going specifically back to where I came from, which is Zimbabwe, it's going through a lot of turmoil at the moment. So that's my reference point when I talk about sanity.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Taiwo?
Well, I like the way Yvonne said that Africa is a big continent, because I can't really imagine going to Nigeria to live, but I can very much imagine living in other African countries. For example, the Gambia. I've never been to Ghana, but I could think of myself living in Ghana, knowing that there are many Nigerians that have lived for generations in Ghana. So the short answer is I would be able to live somewhere in Africa if I had very good reason to do so. But I can't imagine what such a reason would be, since my life is so soft here in the West.
I know you said the question isn't addressed to me, but as somebody who has lived for at least a little while in Africa, I think you'd live a very good life in Africa. The question I would think is that anybody or many people who have African roots who are here, they go back to Africa, they go with money compared to perhaps before they left, I don't know. They build houses which are quite comfortable. They have solar panels. They get a water tank. You can live quite a nice life. What I wonder is whether that is going to help or actually hinder the many people who've lived in Africa their whole life and don't have those facilities. Because you can get back there and live as a middle-class person and in many ways have a better quality of life to what you've got here. You might have some downsides to it, but, that's normal, isn't it? But
coming back to the benefiting of the people who are there, I mean, if you get yourself into a position where you are actually employing people, are you not adding to the economy? Let's say you actually do go back and you set up a small little business somewhere. Yeah. You're helping your nation to develop rather than staying here and earning a wage. And at least that's how I see it.
Ask you the same question.
You can, and I am.
Okay. And your reasons?
What are my reasons? What Katrina said, I can actually live a very comfortable life if I go back home without having to worry about getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning to go and work. Especially now that you can work from home. And also, I just like being with people who look like me, where I'm not judged.
It'll be interesting. It's like all those people who've gone down to Devon now since lockdown, and they want the countryside. Some of them are coming back because they're getting bored. I personally wouldn't want to go and live in Devon for more than a holiday.
I think it's a network. For me, when I went in 2014, and the reason why I came back is I didn't have any friends. And I found it really, really difficult to make friends in Uganda. But I think if you have a network and you have friends and you have people on the same level as you, I think you'd be fine. And that's what I'm trying to build now.
Is that because you're not a married woman and lots of women in Africa felt you were a threat? Unlike Yvonne. Like Yvonne that is married, that should be able to fit in.
It's a valid point, particularly when you talk about Africa.
I'll tell you what I find the hardest thing about making friends. You can, as a white person, talk about Tanzania now, there's quite a lot of people who, you won't want me to call them expats, but you know what I mean, that group of white people who migrant workers. I call them guest workers because they won't be staying for very long. You can make friends with them if you are one of them. I don't find them very attractive on the whole because for many reasons. I can make friends with well-off local African people, business people, because they will go to restaurants and bars and things where I could meet them. And a lot of my colleagues met them. I personally found most of them very soulless people who were very interested in bettering themselves and parties, which isn't really me. So the people I made friends with more were my taxi driver, who I used regularly, one of the teaching assistants where I was working because she was nice enough to invite me to her home, the building and works man, because he's like, you see, in this society, I'm quite a normal person. I'm not well off or anything. But my salary in Tanzania puts me into the bracket of people who consider themselves much more elite than I do. And I don't get on with them because I think they're jumped up. I think they think they're special. I'm not saying every single one. Of course, there won't be every single one, but generalizing. So the sort of people who've got a level which is similar to my level in this country are getting paid less than me.
It's like the pool of people on your socioeconomic level is much smaller in Tanzania than it would be in somewhere like London or Paris or New York.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, Taiwo. It's the fact that that pool of people consider themselves at a different level to when you get your sort of economic group here, there's loads and loads of us and we're not important. Whereas if you're one of that group in a small town in Tanzania, well, you're
a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah, you're one of the big fish. And that, to me, makes me feel a bit uncomfortable because I'm not...
So broadening out the question, I mean, David, I assume, although I don't know, that you have links with Ireland. So would you ever consider living in Ireland?
Yeah, I do sometimes consider it, yeah. And I do feel a bit sick leaving sometimes when I leave Ireland. I feel that kind of sickness. I think what Jackie said about nature as well, I think there's just so much nature in Ireland and you're surrounded by green. So that would be, that would be something I would miss, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I also lived in Japan for 4 years and sometimes I always think would I like to go there? Life is a bit different, a different pace of life. And there might be quite a lot of privileges there as well. A lot things might be more accessible, more of a community at times. So that could be nice to think about too. But yeah, I think as I get older, maybe I value community more and value the people around. And that could be why I might change my mind about going back.
Did you ever live in Ireland?
I think about it, yeah. But I think...
No, I mean, have you ever lived there? You said you lived in Japan for a while.
Yeah, I grew up in Ireland, yeah. So I grew up in Ireland and then came to England for university. So then Ireland is sometimes it felt a bit parochial, and that was always a challenge. It's particularly the times I grew up, there was all the troubles, and I think some of the views were a bit parochial. So I think then that was why I wanted to leave. But now I think Ireland's changed a lot, so I would be tempted to go back. But it's always a dilemma, but I feel that I'm trying to build a life here, so I'm just keeping going with that, but I don't know in the future. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
And it's not a difficult decision to make, because if you've spent quite a long time of your life living in one place, so maybe sometimes a hybrid is a better...
You can always come back again.
I guess the key is to have as many passports as possible.
Some people do 6 months on, don't they? 6 months on, 6 months off. I know some people who do bank work and then do that and then off they go and come back. That
would be ideal.
They do the summers.
Nice.
Yeah, that would be ideal. Now coming back to, I guess, to conclude New Age of Empire, we didn't talk about Thomas Fuller. What did you guys think about Thomas Fuller?
Oh, the black guy, wasn't it? That could count the grains of wheat or whatever it was. And
I know. And the hairs on a horse's tail. I just find that fascinating that a human being can do that.
There's so many unsung and kind of heroes or geniuses almost, that we never really hear about. Who writes the history?
Yeah. It's very important who writes the history.
But I'm sorry, I must say, I mean, one of the other stories that I found shocking was, and when we're talking about present day, how slavery impacted today's living is, when we're talking about insurance and the fact that Lloyd's, and I was like, I have a Lloyd's account. What can I do today? Should I be closing my account?
I always used to think of Lloyd's as a slave bank, which is why I closed my account decades ago.
I have a Lloyd's account, and I've had for years.
Although I think it was something to do with me being overdrawn by £5 and then threatening to find me, and I just thought, I'm not having this.
But that's the thing. This book draws on what's happening today. Cadbury,
Unilever, all those Unilever products that you use in your bathroom. Should you be using them?
In my opinion, I don't think you can live in the West and not be a beneficiary of slavery. I don't see how it's possible. I think everything is so integrated that unless you go and, I don't know, live on a little croft in Hebridean Island or something and become self-sufficient, I don't see how you can unentangle it. I mean, I think it's really important that people tell me it won't happen, but I feel like if the population as a whole understood better the history. Some of the rubbish that gets talked about immigration and some of the attitudes towards race might gradually change a little bit, maybe. But the only thing we can really do, I think, for the future is try to make things more equitable. And I don't know how it's possible, because it isn't. That's what the book is saying, isn't it? That we're locked into the colonial system. So if you get to live here, you're slightly more benefited by it than if you're still living there.
Yeah.
But I think I've got a Lloyd's account, but I've moved my savings.
Is that after reading the book?
No, I'd already done it, because I worry about the ethics of what they do with your savings. So
What do they do with your savings?
Well, they invest in all the corporations that you wouldn't want to invest in, don't they? So, yeah.
Fossil fuels and armaments and all that.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm going to actually close my Lloyd's accounts, just as I'm not going to stop eating chocolate and things. I think it's more, I might, if I found there was some gross exploitation going on in cocoa farming, which there is. Which there is. So maybe, yes.
Yeah, but Cadbury's don't really make chocolate. You need to go up market to Lindt and all the rest of them for real chocolate.
Well, you can get fair trade. How fair it is, I don't know.
Yeah, that's another thing. No,
Who knows? It's got the label.
Yeah, but who decides? If it's fair. Again, we come back to the same thing. Who is it that makes the decision, and in whose benefit is it seen to be fair?
But the chapter you said, "Our chicken's coming home to roost." Something I thought that was the main reason for the name of what you said about sort of people from ex-colonies and that finding their way back to the so-called mother countries. But I also, when I was reading it, to me, there's also an interpretation that all the lifestyle we have, which is causing all the pollution, and that was my bigger interpretation of it, actually.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, we want all these things, but actually, this is now the impact it's having on us.
This is the worry I have, that the fairness would be that, people across the world can have their telly and have their design of this and live, in the same way if they wanted to. But I just think it's caused so much destruction already. How can we be fair but undo some of the destruction? Perhaps the world will just all burn up.
Meteorite. I think that's what we need.
I think that's the solution, yes.
Or like the dinosaurs.
Exactly, and start again. It's funny because my father and I actually joke about that, about Uganda. For Uganda to get to where it's supposed to be, I think we keep saying that everybody just needs to be wiped out and then start. In fact, and then start again. Because even the young people are now infected with this idea of corruption, that as they're growing up, they're already growing up with it. And there's absolutely no way to stop it. So the only way is just take everybody out, start again. Anyhow, out of 5, how would you score New Age of Empire?
3.5, because, as I said earlier, it doesn't answer some questions that kind of niggle at the back of my mind, but I think it's how I've read it, and that I probably need to read back to Black, and that will probably answer some of the questions that I have about it. I kept thinking of Russell Crowe in Gladiator walking through a field of corn, and I kept thinking the Roman Empire, it rose, but eventually it fell. In the same way that, the Chinese Ming dynasty, it rose and it fell. And so Europe as a power will one day fall. Although we probably won't be around to see it. And China will rise and China will fall. So maybe it's just of its time. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed really the way he joined the dots in lots of different areas, particularly when he was talking about the Enlightenment and why so many things kind of emanate from that whole idea of what is science and what is politics and what is intellectual thought and all the rest of it. And is the only model the capitalist one? Is there another way?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was useful and very clear, the style and the way it was laid out, the structure and everything. And also, there was some illuminating bits in it around, for example, the funding of universities. There was overseas development funding that was directly being funded, that was directly being funneled into UK universities. So to see these kind of things in writing, it's just, it's illuminating, and it gives you that kind of lens to think about how, to think about structural racism within the institutions that we have here. So I thought that was really valuable. And yeah, and also because I do think the notion of radical thinking and moving to kind of revolutionary thinking is something that we'll probably move towards more and more, because I don't think capitalism is working really. I mean, it's working for those at the top, but for everyone else, then I think we need new systems. So in terms of my score, I would say 4.5.
No, I'd say 4 out of 5. That's quite a high score, because I thought it was interesting to read. I think the writing was very sharp and provocative. I thought it was absolutely incredible, jaw-dropping actually, as it took us through the history of genocide and slavery that led to the current Western system that we have today. I learned just so much.
Yeah, I would give it 4, definitely. I think it should be widely read. That's all I can say. People might argue with some of it, but the arguments should be, the ideas should be out there.
And yeah, I would give it a 4 as well. But reading this just made me realize that there's so much that I don't know, and so many facts and so many figures that, as Yvonne said, we're jaw dropping. You're like, they did that? Was it is that how much they paid? Is that the number of people that they killed? So yeah, most of the time I just found myself thinking, wow, that's a huge number. Oh wow, that's an interesting fact. Oh wow. So yeah, I absolutely think that this book should be read widely, and unfortunately the people that should be reading it are not going to read it. So anyway, thank you so much for your time, and thank you, and I shall see you next month.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie.
Stay well, everyone.
See you later. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye. And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please like, share or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, goodbye.